Hey everyone, welcome back. On August 8th, the citizens of Ohio are going to be voting in a special election on a ballot measure that essentially makes it harder to pass future ballot measures. It raises the minimum number of votes to 60% as opposed to the current simple majority, and it also changes some of the rules for getting the ballot measure on the ballot in the first place, including increasing the number of counties that you're required to get signatures from a majority to all of them, and removing any potential cure period if there are any defects with any of the signatures. Now, this issue is a proxy for the abortion debate, as there is a pro-choice ballot measure coming up in November that state Republicans really don't want to pass. And as I was looking at the arguments that Republicans were making in order to motivate their voters to go out and support this ballot measure on the 8th, it really breaks down in just a great microcosm as to how Republican elected officials lie to their voters in order to get them to vote against their self-interest. The first thing that Republicans do when they're running this grift is make up an issue that doesn't really exist. And quite frankly, abortion is already an issue that doesn't really exist because if you don't believe abortion is moral for whatever reason, don't get one. Simple as that. But when it comes to this ballot measure and why they want to increase the vote threshold, well, they're saying that those Democrats up in the big cities with all those people are going to force their will onto the smaller, more rural areas that just don't have as many people and therefore don't have as much voting power. But if you look at elections in the state of Ohio in the last two election cycles, it's just not true. Democrats do not have a simple majority in that state. Donald Trump won the state in 2020, and Republicans won both the gubernatorial election and the Senate election in 2022. So, yeah, Democrats do not have a simple majority in the state, so there's really no way that they could force through any ballot measure without some degree of support from moderate Republicans. So when these Republican politicians are going to their voters and saying, hey, you need to turn out because those Democrats are going to force things down your throat, the reality is that Democrats don't actually have the power to do that. Once Republicans have their fake problem, the next step is to propose their fake solution and get their voters to buy into it. And the way they usually want to start that process is by wrapping their solution in the flag. In the case of this upcoming ballot measure, they're saying that it is to defend the Ohio Constitution against unnecessary and radical changes, when in fact it's really designed to protect Ohio politicians. Ballot measures exist as a way for voters to get around their elected representatives if those representatives aren't actually doing their job. And given how gerrymandering is a thing in this country, it's actually pretty easy for politicians to choose their voters and therefore make it pretty hard for the majority to actually be properly represented in state government. So, in lieu of that, ballot measures can be used by citizens in order to make their voices heard and force their politicians to comply with the actual will of the majority. You know, the way democratic governments are supposed to work. While wrapping an issue in the flag is a good way to start, honestly, one of the best ways to motivate the modern Republican Party's base is to say that you are going to be taking something away from people on the left. Owning the libs is a very powerful motivator in the Trump era of Republican politics, and I can think of a number of instances where I have seen Republican voters vote directly against their self-interests as long as they think it would hurt Democrats, liberals, leftists, and whoever else they think their political enemies are, even if it would hurt Republicans more. And that's exactly what we see in this ballot measure. Republican politicians are arguing that they need to stop Democrats and liberals and all these other people from changing the state constitution of Ohio through a ballot measure when we've already shown that they don't have the votes to do that. They need Republican support in order to get anything through. But you know who doesn't need Democratic support? Republicans. They have more than a majority of the votes in that state, and they could probably get it to turn out pretty consistently. But given the numbers Trump and J.D. Vance and most elected Republicans in Ohio put up, they don't have 60% of the vote. So, while Republican politicians are telling their voters that they're taking something away from the left, it's not something that the left had to begin with. But it is something that Republican voters are being told to take away from themselves. The last thing that Republican politicians will try and convince their voters of is that the movement is an organic, grassroots kind of thing, when in fact it's actually being astroturfed and the vast majority of the funding is coming from out-of-state megadonors. Now, yes, I understand that all political groups receive some money from national level organizations, but if you look at the money in the vast, vast majority of it coming from a very small group of people, that's a really good sign that something is being astroturfed. And when it comes to this upcoming ballot measure, the group Protect Our Constitution, which is being put forth as the homegrown Ohio defenders of their state constitution, is actually being mostly funded by an Illinois Republican megadonor, who has contributed $4 of the $4.9 million that the group has raised in order to support the ballot measure. And given that, 4/5 of all the funding that they're getting is coming from one out-of-state megadonor, yeah, that's probably not a good sign for this being an actual grassroots movement. Now, there are a lot of other examples of these arguments being made, but I felt that this ballot initiative out of Ohio was just a really great current case study as to how Republican elected officials try and convince their voters to screw themselves over. Now, if you live in Ohio or you know someone who lives in Ohio, please do share this video around and urge the people that you know to vote against this upcoming ballot initiative, as obviously it doesn't just take away political power from one group, but every citizen in the state. And keep your eyes open for Republican politicians to be using these techniques in future election cycles as well. Think about it.